Alrighty. Okay. So first off, thank you so very much, Julie, for your. Is it Julie or is it pronounced another way?
No, that's right, Julie.
Julie. All
Uh-huh.
right. Thank you so much, Julie, for your time and effort in willing to do this. So from from the email we sent, and then you sent a response, and E and I agreed that we would love to get more content from you, or more, I guess, further, maybe more details, or maybe even tie some of the conversations into the work. So that's why I was calling you today to revisit and further explore some of your responses to the three questions we had talked about. So the first one was talking about COVID and the worldwide protests and all that's happening and how that's impacted you as a creative and the community you're in. And you definitely mentioned, it is hard to watch the news, and I totally agree with that. Um, and your friend, and so it sounded like one of your friends had told you about the protests as well. And after the conversation, you did tune in. Could you expand on that a little more?
So it was mind blowing when I first seen what was happening. First of all, I just couldn't believe it. Just felt like we were pushed back 50 or 60 years. Um, just I don't know. I don't think you can brace yourself for something like that. Definitely once you find out what caused it. And as an African American male, I was just blown away at the entire situation. Even though my life is, I guess it's a little different. I stay in, but I do wonder, what would happen to me if I'm out and about. But I'm a homebody. I like to stay in and paint and work on my artwork. So, but you have to think about it as a African American, I guess, human or person. So.
Hmm. And you'd mentioned before, you noticed that people in your neighborhood are friendlier, which is in the midst of all this. It sounded like because of all that's going on, it's kind of sad that we had to have these tragedies in order to kind of reach these sort of principles or basics of loving your neighbor, so to speak. I don't know if I don't know if that's projecting. Would you agree or not agree?
No, I agree. I mean, I don't think something like this should have to happen before we, speak to one another because, I mean, that's free. But like I said, my neighborhood, for the most part, I guess you could call it a mixed neighborhood. And people just became friendlier after all of this. So I guess it is some good starting to happen.
Good. Has there been anything significant since then? Like, are neighborhoods doing peace talks or doing projects together or other efforts that you've noticed? Maybe any good news?
The only other thing that I noticed since that, I've been seeing people putting Black Lives Matter in their yards. That's basically it in my neighborhood.
Okay.
So it's interesting.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
Well, what's interesting to you about it?
Well, I mean, the yard that I'm talking about, they were Caucasian, and the protests that we're looking at is just not African American people. So I think is pulling all those people, different races, together. I mean, that's the way it should be, I think.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
And in that, talking about the signs, you also mentioned in the second question about, how can artists and art institutions impact communities and raise awareness and be a better political influence. You talked about how art is everywhere, and what better way to use it when dealing with issues. And just from reading that response, so I've been thinking about this idea of art being therapy. For a lot of
Uh-huh.
people, or for a lot of artists, like it's therapy to themselves, and then later on it becomes therapy for others.
Uh-huh.
Um, from some of the artists that I know, one of them is Stephanie Ely. She has her body of work is focused on the visually impaired, and she has astigmatism. She's a photographer.
Uh-huh.
And so she did this body of work because it meant so much to her personally, but then it started resonating with communities of people, both sighted and otherwise, that now is becoming a thing. And, she gained traction. And I feel like a lot of professional artists or established artists start off that way. Was that the same case for you at all in your career?
It was, and my work, usually I'm painting about things that I know about. And, I always felt that if I did that, then, I wouldn't have to make up things that I didn't know about, and I wouldn't be pushed in this pigeonhole, so to speak.
Mm.
So I had a body of work. I was doing self-portraits, and I was talking about my anger. And I think that's one that Edie chose for the Tanger Center event. So in that body of work, I'm talking about losing my best friend to gun violence. And, for me, it was therapeutic, that entire series, because I couldn't talk about what happened to him. And I thought to myself, I can't make it if I don't communicate. So well, I'm a painter, so maybe I can paint about it, and it might help me heal on the inside. And that's what I started to do with that series of work. So that's really the only time I use art in that manner. I take that back. I think anytime you paint, it's a stress reliever. So maybe it's what I've been doing since the first time I picked up a paintbrush, actually.
It's interesting you say that because, like, for the few times that I have made paintings, my background, I'm a graphic designer and illustrator, but I have done painting in as part of the process, and I think there is something therapeutic about with making the strokes or focusing on color blends. And speaking of, I'm actually pulling up your info now, not your info, your piece now, and because I remember looking at how. I remember looking at the motion from the strokes of your paint. There just felt like there was this sort of all-encompassing motion in how you made the contours of the face, and then the images themselves were very vivid. And so I don't know, that stuck out a lot to me personally. And I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit more about your experience with that piece in particular. I know you talked about anger, but like, can you share more about that process? And what was it like for you?
Okay, so I just want to back up for a second.
Sure.
So when I started the series, most of those paintings were really dark and muted. So, as I started to heal, I noticed that, these paintings, they started to lighten up. So that particular painting, I found myself, like I said, holding things in a lot. And, that's why I started to paint about it.
Mm-hmm.
So that painting is titled Blue. And if you look closer, you can see the tears coming out of the eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt really blue a lot. So that's why I created that particular painting.
Hmm. So. And since then, have you noticed any impact, whether it be personal or general, since having that work shown? Like, have people come up to you and kind of opened up at all in any way, or?
Yeah, they have, and that series, it's an older series. Definitely working on something new now. I think the last painting of that series was 2015. But when I was creating that series, it definitely had an impact on a lot of people. So when showing, that work, and it was shown all around, and people would come up to me, and they started talking about people that they lost to gun violence, and they were glad somebody, was actually talking about it in their work. And I said, well, people, they don't understand until they have a best friend, they lose them, or, brother, sister, or any family member. was interesting. And then I was getting actually received some letters through mail from my best friend's teacher.
Yeah.
So you know, the word had a really big impact, I thought.
Good. And then from, let me pull up my notes again. Here we are. And then with all of that, and I think we're talking a little bit more about, again, raising that awareness and political influence, you know, by conveying those personal experiences. I guess I feel like there's more that we could do to it, or I guess what more can be done to convey those personal experiences. Like, would artist talkbacks work, or those one-on-one discussions or community events? What are your thoughts on those?
Now, is this pertaining to the last question?
Yeah, it's pertaining to the last question, but it's also in connection to your piece and what you were just sharing about, you know, people who are opening up about losing their friends to gun violence and such.
Well, I guess they were during the time. I guess a lot of people think you can't use art that way, and you know, I guess it probably gave some of these people an idea of how to deal with their pain. And that's what I talked about when I was talking about the work. This is the only way that I could deal with it. So, I mean, you can see that in their eyes, too, once I started to talk about me working my way through my pain through art. So, you know, they're trying to figure out a way to work through it also. And it was just nice to be around people and talk about it. And I think that helped ease, you know, that pain also.
Okay. And then lastly, you know, when we were talking about what other resources would you check into, you know, talk about the issues, but even in these personal stories, you had mentioned about arts councils and really any ministries, you know, what particular resources were helpful to you as a person, as an artist, or any specific organizations that you could think of?
I would say the Art Council.
Greensboro Art Council?
Actually, yeah. No, Forsyth.
Oh, Forsyth. Okay.
Yeah, and that's the county I live in.
Okay, so you're near Winston-Salem. Nice.
Yeah. So I actually applied for a grant there years ago, and actually my first grant I applied for and got it. And
congratulations.
Actually, they gave me a job. So organizing, actually what rentals, I think it was something like $1.2 million, or they donated to the Art Council. And they hired a team of people to actually go in and organize the work. And then we had a big sale on the artwork. And I think that project lasted something like 4 or 5 years. So it was really neat to have that job, learn a lot about, you know, some of the local artists, some things that I didn't know, and so it was interesting. So I definitely have to say the Art Council.
The Art Council. Incredible resource. Good. And, you know, it's very, it's a relief, you know, here, I mean, just in conversation of this, you know, it is a relief to learn of not just the awakening people are having, but just I feel like you can almost feel the change happening. Months before all this even happened, you know, the Greensboro Arts Council created a task force to talk about how can they be more inclusive in supporting artists in the arts in the Greensboro area. I would imagine the Arts Council in Forsyth is doing something very similar, if not already. And, you know, I think about how all ties together, and I feel like there is a upcoming awakening, you know, of this sort of community. In a weird way, because I'm looking at your painting now, and a radiance in your painting. Like I'm looking encompassing movement. And I'm looking and I'm noticing it's your paintbrush strokes, you know, and they're kind of at this diagonal, and so the same angle as the tears coming from his eyes, and they're just looking at the strokes in the cheeks and in the beard and the neck and the eye being sort of that similar diagonal direction to the top left corner being somewhat the source of it. It also helps that it's somewhat golden, you know. There's in a weird way, there's a radiance and that makes me hopeful when I think about all that's going on. Again, this is just my sharing my experience with your artwork. Was that intentional, or would you just say that's up to the viewer?
Yeah, yeah, man. I give them the content, but I like for people to bring their own thoughts and ideas to the work. So however they interpret it.
Yeah. And this is before, you know, contemplating the context you just shared with me. Like, it didn't even register to me about, again, the anger and sorrow and the acknowledgement of losing a friend to gun violence. So, you know, that does make it, but even in that, I still get this sense of hopefulness. I wasn't sure if that was intentional or if that's just purely my own experience.
Well, you know, I guess that's hard to answer, actually. Yeah, like I said, for me, I was hoping the pain would go away when I was creating the work, and it worked. It actually worked. So, you know, people take away different things from the work, and some of those, they might be too angry. And some of them I had ski masks on, bandanas on, trying to talk my way through how the crime actually happened. So it was definitely interesting for me also.
I'm glad it helps. I think that is something to remark on and even sort of harbor on, how both in the making and in the observation of you know, how that kind of helps extract the negative energies or the things that are dealing with internally, how it extracts out of us in these different ways. And I know for me, it's easier to connect with people talking about art or exploring what they're experiencing with certain pieces. No, again, it's just a privilege to really talk to you and B, to actually have this moment with the artwork. So I really do thank you for your time. That's all the questions that I had. The only other thing I have left is, because I want to empower artists as much as I can, or at least leave a platform for us to say what we want to say and have it preserved throughout time. Is there anything else that you would have to say, or anything to share with any other human being or people going through all that's happening, or for people who experience the gun violence firsthand, or people who resonate with your work? Anything to say to any of those?
Yeah, I just say be kind to one another. I mean, I think that's where it starts. You know, if you think about those words, then you know, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation about my artwork pertaining to my friend. You know.
Right.
You know, so I say be kind to one another. It's not that hard to do, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. One would think that, you know. I totally agree.
Yeah. One last thing.
Yeah.
I didn't think about this, but I did the artists in schools for the Green Hill.
Yeah.
And you know, that's an outreach program, and I really enjoy doing that. And I think I did it for, was it 6 years, 5 or 6 years, I think. It was really nice. Okay. And I definitely wasn't expecting to, you know, connect with the kids the way I did. some of those projects that we did, they handled themselves really well. And one of the projects that stuck out to me is we were doing these collage-based projects, and I wanted them to talk about content. I was really big on that. I said, well, anybody could just make something. What does it mean to you? So one young lady, she created this piece. It was a review mirror and a video. You could see his face looking in it. And I would go around to each student trying to find out what their work was about. And she said, well, the tornadoes that happened in High Point, it destroyed our home. And she said, I remember us driving away from my home, and that's what this section of my collage represents. So I thought that was very powerful for the fourth grade. And so that program definitely it made a big impact on me.
Good.
Yeah.
No, that's always, it got me into the arts. I've always been involved in the arts since I was 3. And I think in kindergarten or first grade, according to Mom, because I don't remember it, but in that same building, in that Cultural Arts Center building, there occasionally do it. They have these false walls that they have kids' artwork or artworks from kids in other schools. Well, apparently my artwork ended up in those spaces. And yeah, it was just like, and I think that sort of affirmation and that empowerment in being able to make something, express something, and have it shown. And I don't know, there's something about it being like your stuff is worthy of showing to X number of strangers. I just find that concept very empowering. So I'm glad that you got to go through that program. It sounds like it did something similar, if not.
Yeah, that's interesting what you said, because like my college students, I tell them this all the time. Your work is good enough to show, and I think my biggest thing is trying to get them to believe in themselves.
Mm-hmm.
The teaching part is easy,
yeah.
But trying to get them to believe that they can show their work and they can do it, those things are really hard to do,
I agree. I graduated from A&T back in 2014, and then I later graduated from SCAD in 2016. And in both occasions, it was tough because, for a while, I actually did lose faith in myself as an artist. I would see other artists and be inspired by their work and just felt like, my stuff, who am I? And, what do I bring? And so it took a while to heal again. Because I look back and that affirmation as a kid of having family members, clap after I do a performance or make music or made a painting and they would show it, that validation, that affirmation was very helpful. But I also had to learn about, you are worthy whether people show it or not. And and that lesson wasn't as clear to me until after school, and it just clicked one day. Like, all right, nothing defines me but me, so to speak.
And I tell them that, look at what some of the other students are doing on other campuses, because they're not making this quality of work that you guys are making.
Right.
And definitely when I tell you that, that should mean something.
Right.
That you're on the right path.
Well, I appreciate you as a teacher doing that, because as a former student, not of yours, but like a former student of other artist teachers in general, like that does mean a lot.
And I can, I can see the difference in them. And something I started a couple years ago, I would get commissions, and people, you have to break the price ranges down to them. And, some people they just can't afford my work, and so I I started giving the commissions to my students, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I've been doing that for a couple of years now. Just had one before the coronavirus stuff started. Gave her, I think, 2 commissions, and painting commissions too. So I mean, she did pretty good off of those.
Good. I'm actually about to cry. I'm actually about to cry a little bit. That is so. There was in college, or in A&T, there was a staff member that commissioned me to do a portrait of his wife. And I remember doing the painting, and, I did the best that I could out of what I had and whatnot, and I charged him a super low number because I just felt like I was ripping him off if I did higher. And so I did the best I could with what I got and gave it to him, and he paid me, I think, double the amount. I think I got like $200 out of that.
Oh, that's good.
And what he told me, I think was better than whatever money he could give. He said, "Don't ever sell yourself short again."
Oh, I like him. He sounded like me.
Yeah, he was like, "This painting is better than what I was expecting. It's phenomenal. You should never feel like you have to discount yourself again." And that stuck with me. Like that, again, it's part of that healing process. And, I had another college professor that, reminded me, he told me often, trust yourself. Just trust yourself. So I think that's important, as we teach and give information to students and people that are coming up, I'm a firm believer in that affirmation, that encouragement. I do believe it's up to the individual, but I can't explain it. There's just something about that external confirmation, so to speak.
Yeah, and you know what? I think it's important, and I've been teaching since 2008. Yeah, 2008 is when I started, and in the beginning, I never, and I was young, I didn't tell students that they were doing a good job, but I thought I was a good teacher. But then I started to say, well, maybe they need to hear this. I mean, they're doing a good job, but I think they need to hear it,
Yeah, they do.
So, yeah, they do. And I started doing that. I said, all right, you're on the right track, keep working hard. And, and if they had a problem, I'll be honest with them. I wouldn't tell them that they were on the right track. So, all right, let's figure out a way to get this moving in the right direction. And I always talk about this, especially in class. I think there's a way to say everything. And when I was in college, they would just flat out tell you it was ugly.
Yeah. Yeah, I used to hear the horror stories. Like, there would be, teachers that come and, like, literally tear your artwork apart.
They would, yeah. They rip it. They rip the paper up,
Yeah. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
But, and I think there's a bigger piece this all talks to as well. It's like, in my opinion, I don't think it's so much on the professors. I would argue that it's more of the student's job, but I think it's important for people to know what they need. Some people, need that affirmation, and some people need that sort of kick in the butt.
Yeah, you're right. And see, I was totally different. I was the person, once you show me and tell me what to do once, then you don't have to come back and check on me, because I'm going to get it done.
Right.
And I'm going to do it over and over until I think it's right. And that's the kind of student I was. But everybody's not the same.
Right. And I think
some people, go ahead.
Oh, no. This is your spotlight, as you're saying.
And some people, they need that guidance, man. Some other people don't. And I don't know, I guess I was just raised to have, tough skin. I guess that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, but it also sounds like you knew yourself. Am I off in saying that?
No, I think you're right. It's funny that you said that, because I was just going through a lot of old things yesterday, and I read something from one of my mentors back in community college, and it was just a little card he made me, and it said, "Thank you for being so strong in who you are." And I said, man, that was so true. And I was the person that would help the people in my classes that were not like me, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it just comes from the upbringing, really.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my dad was one of those. He was a really tough guy. Had a lot of confidence. It wasn't him being cocky. I always thought, you know, man, this guy has a lot of confidence, and I want to be that way when I get older.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so.
You know, and I think that is, again, the challenge, again, as a student, we have to know ourselves so we can tell our teachers what we need.
Mm-hmm.
There's a mentor I'm watching right now on his podcast, and he briefly talked about how education, at least in the education system, there's a general focus about kind of putting stuff into people, like information. I need to find where he got this source from, but he read somewhere, and it was the opposite. Like, education is about extracting what is within the person.
Oh, yeah.
And
that's pretty much what we're saying. You know, you get these kids to believe in themselves. They have it already. I mean, they wouldn't be taking the classes.
Right.
You know, if they didn't, or if they didn't think they could. So,
right.
No, I think that's right.
Yeah, and it took a while. Like, I had to stop and really meditate on that because, yeah, I think it syncs up with other personal experience and otherwise, you know. To your point, you know, people don't have, if they didn't have it, they wouldn't have been in the class in the first place. They wouldn't be where they are.
Yeah, right. So, something got them there. They had to take some sort of steps to get there. I mean, maybe they were taking art classes from, first grade. I mean, who knows? But, I don't think those things happen overnight. I always talk about what happens to a lot of kids. I think everybody starts to draw, in first grade. They give them crayons or whatever. Right. So you get one kid, he'd come in and say, well, that's ugly. And what happened is that kid will stop. They just tear his confidence down. But some of the other kids, they keep going. And those were the kids I thought that were taking the classes in high school when I got there. See, I didn't take my first art class until 10th grade. But I didn't have that issue. I was drawing, and my cousin was in art class, and he always tried to get me to take the art class, and I would. I was actually a better drawer than him. But I just didn't want to take the art class. Like I said, I was a late bloomer, I guess. But I think I turned out okay. And I sold my first drawing, I think, first grade. Yeah, it was first grade, actually. Right. And I stopped around 5th or 6th, and I didn't start back until 10th grade. And the only reason I started back then was my mother, she had a really tough question for me. And that question was, what do you want to do with your life? And I said, that's a really tough question for a person in 10th grade. But I had to think about it. She said, you don't have to answer me now. You can come back weeks later with your answer. But you need to answer that question. And I came back and I said, basketball. I was a pretty good basketball player. And she just laughed at me. And she said, well, what are the odds of that happening? And I said, man, she has another good point. So I said, art. I think I want to try art again. I want to take an art class. And she said, that's okay. We don't care what you do as long as you stay out of trouble and be good at whatever you do. So we don't really care. You can be an ice skater. So I thought that was what I needed to hear, Right. I guess that validation. So. Yeah, it reminds me of another mentor of mine. He's mentioned, whatever it is you want to be, just be the best at it. If it's the best kite flyer, great, go and be the best kite flyer that you can be. It sounds like in a very similar vein, but I'm sure to appreciate a little bit more now. Juie, there's one other thing. So, we were going back to what we were saying with teaching.
I come from a family of educators, and it seems like teaching now I always saw it as a one-sided thing, but it does actually sound like an adventure that the teacher and the student are on. And I don't know, I just wanted to know how would you think about teaching? Like, what is teaching to you?
Oh, it's everything, and it's something I always wanted to do, and I knew I wanted to do it. Because, like I said earlier, I was all about helping people from the beginning.
Okay.
And, teaching just fell into that. So, for me, teaching is everything. I always said, well, I don't want any kids, so how would my name live on, right?
Right.
And, I mentioned a couple of my mentors already. Mm-hmm. So I think when I talked to Edie, I mentioned them. And I think through the work, my name would definitely live on. But through those students, they're going to take, these things that I helped them with. They're going to show someone else. And that it just keeps traveling. Mm-hmm. And it's happening on the campus. I talk to these students when they come in. I have that question, well, I know you guys took the class because you need it, but why did you take the class? And most of them will say, because we heard what kind of teacher you were. And I said, whoa, that's big.
Right.
And where did you hear that? This person, we hang out with them, and they talk about you all the time. And that's why we took the class. And I said, well, see, that's how I want to, make that change, right?
Right. No, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Well, Juie, thank you so much for sharing that and for this. This was way more. This was way more than what I was expecting, and I'm just truly grateful. So thank you so much for your time and energy.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you too. And I answered those questions through email. I said, well, maybe he could pull more out of me than I gave him, because I am very direct. I don't like giving fluff. So
that's fair. Yeah, and I'm not a fan of fluff either. So when I do have to build, I want to be context. I feel like the answers you gave were good. And in all fairness, and I apologize because I feel like I look at those questions and I notice when I made them, it was really more in focus of, the situations and the times that we're in, more or less, and the role of the arts, and because we're in some really unprecedented times, not just COVID and the protests, but even arts institutions, museums, arts organizations, they're going through somewhat of a renaissance period where they're trying to revamp, how are we going to stay relevant in this new world? And as generations are switching out in the workforce, as technology is advancing, museums they're not like the way they were 20, 30, 40 years ago, or even a century ago.
No, you're right. They're nothing like they were, yeah.
Yeah, and Sarah Hurst Green, an independent curator, she had made a statement about how creative centers, art centers, and museums are now these spaces for the living, for the now, for the contemporary, which I think is just as important as archiving the stories of the past or even predicting the future. And so in all of that, that's kind of where these questions were really coming from, was like less about the art piece itself and more about the context in which people relate to. But I noticed that was a mistake or not a mistake, there was a missing piece because it still ties, because these creative works we make, these artistic artifacts we make, are just as relevant, just as important in the storytelling and in the history making. So, with my interview with Darlene, interview with Cozart, after the three questions, to try to tie that back into their work, because it's all connected.
Yeah, right.
And I think we're coming, again, it's just my perspective of it, but I feel like generally speaking, people are coming to an understanding of that, or a different understanding of that, and just trying to see what other areas are we not exploring. And so I think what you shared not only connects back to your work and connects it to the times of today, but I think, I think it really brought us to a very human moment, like when we're talking about teaching and that affirmation and just that human experience of connecting with another person to help them with whatever goal it is in their life.
Right.
And I think those are sort of the essentials and the core things we're really getting at with anything that we do. So with all that, thank you so much.
Yeah,
it really was a
not a problem. Glad I could help.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and tie this up. I'm going to stop my notes real quick. And I'm going to get with Edie in the next 10 minutes, make sure everything is settled, and we should have something coming out soon.
All right, man. Good luck.
Thank you so very much, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend.
You too.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.